Okay, I'm recording now, so you better behave. And I am going to start sharing my screen, the PowerPoint. Share. Okay, let me make sure. There we go. My screen is all black. I'm not sure what's going on, guys. Give me a second to figure this out. I know when I go to launch the presentation, my screen goes all black. Let me try once again. Bear with me, okay? Yeah, I see nothing on my screen. Oh, okay. Can you see the screen now? Please speak up because I don't see your.
Yeah, we can see it.
All
Yeah,
right.
we can see it.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Okay. So this session, I'm sorry, this section is meant to give you a brief introduction of what in the political economy of Latin America literature is known as the New Left, right? What is the New Left, okay? I put together this presentation, I don't know, 7 years ago, and every year I update this with new information. So I think it's pretty decent and very useful for this purpose. So now, how do I? All right. So I don't even remember why I began with this, but this is a quote by JFK, John F. Kennedy. Those who make reform impossible will make revolution inevitable. You know, the idea of this quote is to show you that Latin America is a very good example of places where when the economic system doesn't work for the majority of the population, something happens, sometimes in a violent way, sometimes through democratic means, sometimes it takes the shape of, you know, like I said, a military coup or something, but something is going to happen. And, you know, John F. Kennedy called this a revolution. But anyway, let me explain this in the context of the New Left in Latin America. I press a button and for some reason the slide doesn't go to the next one. Let me try.
Yeah, we're not seeing your new slide if you had switched it.
Yeah, are you looking at characterizing the New Left, the title right now?
Yeah, the New Left in Latin America. So just be the first slide of your presentation, but it's not like full screen or anything. I don't know if you had done that.
Yeah, let me try something else then. That's not going to work.
There it goes.
All right, so
A little bit better.
All right, let's go that way. Maybe it's my Mac, my malfunctioning or something. This is going to do it. All right. Thank you,
I think
guys.
it just, the window just wasn't selected because when you tab.
Right. Thank you, Cody. Anyway, but this is the quote I was talking to you about. Those who make reform impossible will make revolution inevitable. But anyway, all right. So this is what we are trying to get from this presentation. How is that New Left governments came to power in Latin America? What's the political system from which they emerge from? Who are the type of groups and coalitions that are giving support to these New Left governments? What are the policies that these guys espouse? What is the impact or likely impact of these policies on democracy and governance in the region? And also, a very important question is this: what are the institutional changes that these guys are promoting or implementing in some cases? So all of these questions are very difficult to answer. Certainly, you know, very difficult to answer in 1 hour, but I'll give it a shot, okay? So first of all, if we're talking about a New Left, we need to make reference, we are doing this because probably we're making reference to a old left or the first left. You know, to have something new, well, we should have something old or something that came first. So the answer to your question is yes, yes. So let's talk about the old left. When we talk about the old left, and keep in mind when I make reference to left and right, I'm talking about right, you know, in the sense of neoliberal Western first world policies. And when I talk about the left, I'm talking about more socialist type of policies, right? So that's the idea: left, right, left, right. So when I talk about the old left in Latin America, we're talking about mainly two groups: the very, very old, and this includes the movement of independence leaders like Bolivar, San Martin, Argentina, Zapata in Mexico during the Mexican Revolution, Antonio Sandino in 1934 in Nicaragua. We passed that because this is, you know, part of the history of Latin America. More recent all left governments include people in Cuba like Fidel Castro and Che Guevara, Cárdenas in Mexico, Allende in Chile. Remember the military coup in 1973, Perón in Argentina. So we can talk about a lot of very interesting people and historical figures in Latin America from the last century, or even 2 centuries ago, if you think about Bolivar and Martí, that play a very important role in shaping up what is Latin America today. So, you know, and I'm just going to read this from the screen. If Latin America today enjoys a degree of democratic rule and peace and progress and, you know, all of these good things that come with a developed society, is because in great part, because the existence of the left. These leftist people, they have been making a difference by, well, existing, fighting, provoking, pressuring, you know, counterbalancing leadership. And of course, in many cases, they have paid a huge price. All of these guys that you see on the screen, with a few exceptions, so let me single them out. Bolivar, Martí, Zapata, Sandino, Guevara, Allende, they were all killed. You know, the only ones that I think die of natural causes, maybe Cárdenas and certainly Perón. But anyway, the point is that these guys risked and lost their lives for defending what they believe was right. And again, we are going to talk about this later. But again, right now, I'm just trying to give you a glimpse of what the old left was or is considered, so that we have some point of reference of you know, the big names 1 century or 2 centuries ago, in contrast with the new names more recently in, you know, in the late 20th century and early 21st century. Now, as part of this introduction, there are many people today, all of them still alive, that wrote a significant amount of pieces in very important places, questioning this emergence or this resurgence of leftist movements in Latin America, responding to the Washington Consensus, responding to the debt crisis, responding to the leadership of the US and other European countries. For example, there is this very famous guy, Jorge Castañeda, that wrote this book called Utopia Unarmed, that basically claims that, with the exception of Cuba, because Castro was still alive, Fidel Castro was still alive, over the last 30 or 40 years, the groups in Latin America that claim to be leftist, have totally failed in its efforts to take power, to make social revolution, and to change the world. Basically, he was, you know, talking about them as an utopia, something that is nice to think about, but that will never happen, right? And in a stronger combat, a group of people led by Vargas Llosa, who is the son of a Nobel Prize in Literature from Peru, They wrote what they call the Guide to the Perfect Latin American Idiot in 1996. They basically said this, and you know, the words in italics is a quote: revolution, economic nationalism, hatred of the US, faith in the government as an agent of social justice, a passion for a strongman rule over the rule of law. All of this is derived from an inferiority complex. You are idiots. You know, they are talking straight to the face to all of these leadership in Latin America, idiots. In fact, you guys are bearing the responsibility of the Latin America's current state of underdevelopment. Man, so just to give you an idea, these are the cover of the two books. I have both of these books, I have them in my office. So if anybody at some point in the future wants to borrow them, you're happy. I'm happy to give you a loan for these books. The point is that we're talking about a group of people, intellectuals in Latin America, questioning the strength, the efficacy, the legitimacy of these emerging leftist groups in Latin America, because they claim is just a dream. One of them, Castañeda, and the other guy basically says, "Oh, you're idiots. You don't know what you're doing. You know, you are just using this inferiority complex, pointing fingers, finding culprits, without realizing that we're inflicting this pain ourselves, because you guys, are calling for this revolution, social revolution, but it's just not the way to go." And we are going to come back to these guys in a second. Anyway, now, we also have to consider the following. And I am going to give you names and other things of these new leftist people in a couple of minutes. But it was not just politicians. It wasn't just leaders of groups on the countryside or environmental groups or political parties that were calling for this refusal to accept the Washington Consensus and the consequences of the Washington Consensus. No. There were people, not just in Latin America, but around the world, looking at what was happening in Latin America, and they were writing about it. They were expressing support. And I'm going to give you some names. Nobel Prize winners like Harold Pinter, Jose Saramago in Portugal, Joseph Stiglitz. We'll also talk about Joe Stiglitz, the former chief economist of the International Monetary Fund. Now, some of you in political science, in history, have heard of these two guys, Noam Chomsky and James Petras. There are countless, and some of these readings are on your reading list. They wrote lots of pieces speaking about what was happening in Latin America in the 1990s. Right after this, the debt crisis, the Washington Consensus. In Europe as well, you have Ramonet, very important newspapers, and even in the US, the Washington Post wrote interesting pieces. So the point is, when we think about this leadership in Latin America in isolation, we may think, oh, well, maybe they're just, trying to take advantage of the situation, to gain political power and all that. But when you think about that, they were not alone, that there were a lot of people with, great minds, great thinkers, intellectual people writing about the need for some sort of counterbalance to this dramatic imposition of the conditionality of the IMF and the World Bank. Well, calling them idiots sounds a bit harsh. Maybe they were not as dumb as many people thought, right? So keep that in mind. By the way, two books that I also have in my office, if you want to buy them, you're welcome to. But two very famous books that were read again in the 1990s, and that's part of the origin of this new left, are these two books on the screen. One is was written by Eduardo Galeano, this novelist from Uruguay. And the idea, if you think about the name Open Veins of Latin America, is that, think about when you go to lab work, they start sucking your blood, sucking your blood away, sucking your life away. In this book, there is a very interesting statistical treatise of how over the last 600 years, natural resources depletion has been taking place because of the intervention of multinational corporations recently, but also since the time of Spain and Portugal during the colony. The second book is dependency theory, right? So these two books became the central piece of this new movement emerging, taking place in Latin America once again as a result of this imposition of the Washington Consensus. And there is a very famous episode. In 2009, there was this summit of the Americas in this island in the Caribbean. And suddenly, the guys that you see, well, obviously you recognize the guys to the left, Barack Obama, but the one to the right is Hugo Chavez, that had just been elected president of Venezuela. And without saying a word around the table, he stood up and starts walking with a book. Well, the Secret Service didn't know it was a book. I mean, it looked like a book. But obviously, Chavez was already antagonic to the US foreign policy. So it was a very nervous moment because there was, I don't know, 15 feet of separation between Barack Obama and Chavez. And he started walking towards the US president, only to give him a copy of the Open Veins of Latin America book to Barack Obama. And nobody knows really what he said. There was no open mic or anything, but essentially Chavez later said, the reason I'm giving this book to Barack Obama is because we need to educate the Western world, specifically the US, of the damage and the pain that they have caused in Latin America. And this is it is a good starting point. Anyway, this is just kind of an anecdote, true story. It happened, and of course there are many versions of it. But here is a picture for you guys. Anyway, so what was happening? What was happening? Well, let me give you the context of what was happening in the 1990s. In Mexico, President Salinas had already arranged for the signing of NAFTA that actually happened in 1994. So this free trade agreement between the US, Canada, and Mexico, it was done. And obviously it's all neoliberal right policies. In Brazil, Cardoso was about to eliminate, politically speaking, Luis Ignacio da Silva, Lula, the person that eventually became president of Brazil. In Argentina, Menem, following the recipe of the IMF, had taken the steps to peg the peso to the dollar, and all this Perón, the legacy of Perón, the old leftist guy, was behind. Oh, nobody, I mean, even during those days, people were talking about, oh, Perón is gone. But of course, Perón came back, as we will see in a second. In fact, President Clinton at the time already had in mind this idea of a NAFTA plus. The idea of expanding NAFTA, not just US, Mexico, and Canada, but expanding this all the way through Panama. And eventually, so Clinton thought we could expand this all the way to South America, Chile, and Argentina. So the idea was that in 1994, NAFTA, 3 countries were going to be members. And in just a few years, they were going to expand this through the entire American continent, not just North America, but Central, South America. By the way, this 1994 Summit of the Americas that Clinton prepare, never took place. That never took place because in 1994, we had this major insurrection in the Mexican jungle. Some of you may remember Comandante Marcos, this guy with a ski mask, with a pipe, a very intellectual guy. And of course, they took the weapons and started fighting. So this happened the same day that NAFTA became effective in 1994. But anyway, so all of this was happening in the minds of the leadership in power, supported by the IMF, the World Bank, the Washington Consensus institutions. However, what you need to remember is that 10 years earlier, Mexico and the entire Latin American region had suffered the worst economic and social crisis since the Great Depression. We already covered this. This is the lost decade. GDP per capita fell, and then you can see poverty rates were on the rise, inequality was increasing, and look at this, not only during the, let me use my drawing skills, I always forget, not only during the 80s, but during the 90s, they stay pretty high, very high poverty rates, very high inequality rates, right? And of course, people, were not happy with this. I'm talking about the majority of the people in Latin American countries, not those in power, not the entrepreneurial class, not the politicians. No, they were having a good time because of the high concentration of wealth and income. I'm talking about everybody else. And this goes back to the quote by John F. Kennedy, that those that make reform impossible will make revolution inevitable. So that's where this the motivation for the quote comes from. Let me go back to my mouse here. Okay. Now, something else that was happening through the 80s, at the same time that all this socioeconomic crisis was taking place. This is key. This is a key element that explains the birth of the New Left. The dramatic process of democratization that took place in Latin America is an element that without the New Left would have never been a reality. I'm talking about that, in the 1920s, the 1930s, the 1940s, many of the Latin American countries didn't have democracies. They have dictatorships, sometimes military dictatorships, non-democratic means to elect leadership. And when they had elections, very few people could vote, no female votes, lots of things that change through the 80s. Because this democratization process finally created a space for peaceful opposition, for those that were marginalized from the decision-making process and those that were excluded from the process. I'm talking about workers, farmers, indigenous populations. All of these people in Latin America, even today, are the majority. Finally, they had a way to express their opinion, to be heard, to have a presence at the table, right? So this process of democratization in Latin America was key to understand what happens next. All right. This is a pretty heavy chart. Okay, let me stop to hear Cody. Yes, Cody, please go ahead.
Yeah, so the old left, were they opposed to democracy or they were opposed to populism?
Okay, the old left has different shades as the new left does, as I will explain in a second. Because, for example, Perón was a member of the military. Simón Bolívar was a military man too. Cárdenas was a member of the military. So it was not that they were democratic in the sense that they were elected through a electoral process, but they always expressed concern for the poor, for the indigenous populations, for making sure that all decision making was as inclusive as possible. So in that sense, they have this common denominator, despite the fact that some of them were members of the military, some of them actually were part of dictatorships, right? Most of them were populist, for sure. But, you can be a populist from the left, and you can be a populist from the right too, right? Like, for example, here, well, let's not get into the American politics, but, former President Trump was a populist from the right? Anyway, the point is that there is no clear answer to that one, Cody. It's a good question, but it's hard to answer because different countries have different expressions. The common denominator is the concern for social justice, for inclusion. That's the key that joins all of these group of people in the old left and the new left, presumably as well. Although we will see that, wait for the story. Good question, Cody. Any other comment or question before I go on? All right. So this is what this slide is showing. This is a selection of countries, the most representative in Latin America, that elected presidents running on leftist platforms in the 1980s or the early 2000s. So here you have Venezuela, 1998, and then was succeeded by President Maduro in 2013, still president of Venezuela. And this number that you have at the end is the number of people in million that's representing the size of the population of that country. So 30 million in Venezuela. In Brazil, you have more than 200 million people. Now, the color represents something very important. The black, Venezuela, Argentina, Bolivia, Nicaragua, and other countries in black are representing what I am going to explain next as the radical left. And in blue, like Brazil, Uruguay, Chile, and Peru, you have are representing the moderate left, right? So I am going to start making a distinction between radical left and the moderate left for reasons that are going to become clear in a few minutes. But anyway, in yellow here at the very end, I don't know how many of you are aware of this, but President López Obrador, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, is a president that ran on a populist leftist platform. And in 2018, just 2 years ago, he was elected. For the first time in Mexico, the left has a chance. And of course, we can discuss this later when we talk about contemporaneous Latin America. Very controversial figure. Some people think that he's blowing up the opportunity. Some people think that he's doing a fantastic job. We'll talk about that. But the point, the reason I left this in yellow is because this happened very recently and very unexpectedly. Nobody thought that Mexico will ever have a president on a leftist from a leftist platform. Anyway, let me show you this. This is a picture in 2004 from The Economist. And the idea of this picture is to show you that Latin America, at least South America, and at some extent Central America, if you think of Costa Rica, was turning red. Or like I said before, they start calling this the pink wave. As opposed to the Red Scare of the 1940s or during the Cold War. So obviously for the US and for as a matter of foreign policy, this was not looking good because in 1973, as we already learned through the military coup, they were able to get rid of Salvador Allende, but suddenly Latin America was turning red again, and not just in Chile, but in many other countries as well. Chad, you have your hand up, please go ahead.
Yes, that I was going to ask about the coups. In Chile, the Allende change was stopped in its tracks, but in these other changes to the new left, did right-wing coups or revolutions interrupt some or a few of these?
Well, remember, we're talking about 2004. This happened almost 20 years ago. So let's keep the historical process going. The answer to your question is not really, although some things are happening for reasons that, again, we are going to explore in due time. But let me give you a preview, a chat. Particularly in situations of radical leftists, like, for example, Bolivia, they didn't deliver to the masses what they promised, just like right presidents didn't, right? So the left, for example, in the case of Bolivia, was failing too. And this gave rise to a very strong opposition. I cannot remember the name of the lady, but her first name is Ines. Anyway, this lady ran against the president, Evo Morales in Bolivia, and she won. But there were irregularities in the process, and she is in jail right now. She is in jail right now. And the current president of Bolivia is what some people call a puppet of Evo Morales. So I'm talking about, I mean, this lady Ines is in jail right now, you know, on March 17, 2021. So all of this, the story is not over yet, Chad. This is an unfolding story. We're looking at reactions and counter reactions and fraud and deceit, and all of this is a very fascinating time for Latin America. So in the case of Bolivia, it's unfolding. In the case of, you know, if you think about the case of Mexico, Mexico is way behind because the rest of Latin America already had leftist governments, you know, since 15, 20 years ago. And in Mexico, they just had one 2 years ago. So we are behind in the history of this movement. So let's wait for more to come, Chad. Cody, go ahead.
Yeah, I think you touched on it previously when you first introduced the topic, but did the way the politicians address the issues in terms of a gradualist approach or a radical sort of forced approach affect whether or not they were sort of overthrown or had large opposition?
No, not really, not really. What really makes a difference is what happens after they got in power, because it was until they grabbed power that they start expressing these radical approaches. Just to give you an idea, I think it was 2007, 2008, I was traveling in Managua, the capital of Nicaragua. And I speak Spanish, I look like them, so they open up very easily. So it's awesome because I connect with a lot of people. Anyway, so I was riding a cab, a taxi, on the back seat, and the driver was looking at me through the rear mirror, right? Hey, well, whatever. And then we passed by what looked like a huge country club. Well, I couldn't see what was it because the walls were like 10 feet tall. And it was the whole square, you know, like huge complex. And then I said, you know, what is this? And then he said, obviously you're not from here, right? Antonio, no, whatever. So, well, this is the house of President Daniel Ortega. Like, what? Yes, he has a swimming pool, a place where the horses run, a discotheque, an underground bowling alley, obviously house guests. Like, what are you talking about? Yes, professor. You know, he knew I was a professor, blah, blah, blah. Yes, professor, you know, we voted for our, you know, beloved president, you know, a leader of the Sandinista revolution. But unfortunately, in the particular case of this president in Nicaragua, he, well, started using power to benefit him, to benefit those around him. And Nicaragua today is the third poorest country in Latin America. Yikes, right? So no wonder people right now are trying to get rid of him. But he became so powerful because he was so radical that, different from Evo Morales, that had to exit Bolivia running, and the only place that gave him asylum was Mexico. In Nicaragua, they have not been able to get rid of this guy. And I shouldn't be saying getting rid of this guy. They have not been able to oppose in an effective way the ways the president has been conducting himself in the last few years. That sounded more diplomatic, right? But the point is the same. The point is the same. So yeah, it doesn't matter how they ran. What mattered was, or what is mattering right now is how they are behaving. The same way in Venezuela. I mean, think about it. The opposition is able to gain some spots in the Congress, while the president abolished the Congress. It's a very radical move, right? So no Congress in Venezuela, because if we approve the Congress, we are going to be opposing me. No way. You know, there are very radical approaches that are just making that some of these people are just stay there. But anyway, I don't want to get ahead of myself, because there is a road that is going to lead us there. Good comments, good questions, guys. Anyway, as you can see in the screen right now, Latin America was turning red, right? Now, keep in mind, this is also the time where we were fighting Saddam Hussein in Iraq, all these problems in the Middle East. So when you read the literature about these times in Latin America, many people argue that the US was so distracted with what's happening in the Middle East that they forgot to look in their own backyard. And this is the result of it. I don't buy the argument, but it is possible that the US was really busy dealing with other problems in other regions in the world, and that's how many people here in the US, in Latin America, were able to gain significant ground, as you can see in 2004, right? All right, let's see. So we're talking about that 60% of the total population in Latin America, I'm talking about 15, 20 years ago. Right now, we are about 700 million. But in 2004, around 60% of the population, 12 out of 18 countries, were governed by elected presidents to the left. At the time, exceptions were Mexico, not anymore, Colombia, Honduras, but very few exceptions. Most of the Latin American countries were ran by leftist governments. And again, remember I said that there were the radicals and the more moderates. In the literature, you're going to find these with different names. The radical left typically is characterized as the populist left. And the moderate left, those in blue, remember a couple of slides ago, in blue, like Brazil, Uruguay, Chile, Peru, they are characterized as the social democrat left. I'm not sure if I agree with this terminology, but anyway, that's the way to find it. And the point I'm trying to make, and I really want to emphasize this, is that blue social democrat are moderate, and the black populist are the radical ones. All right. However, in the literature, you're going to find very confusing stories. There are many shades and many colors of Latin America. It's not just black and white, it's gray and all sorts of colors. So you have the revolutionaries, the protectionists, the hyper-nationalists, the Crusaders. If you read the literature like I did, you're going to find like, oh man, this is a nightmare. There are so many different kinds. And this is why I try to use this bifurcation, this distinction between left and right. I'm sorry, between radical and moderate. Because if you go this way, now you have the big spenders, the egalitarians, the multiculturalists. It's just all over the place. It's just all over the place. You could, well, this is an exaggeration, but you could choose one label for each president in each country if you wanted to, which is too much. It's too much. For analytical purposes, it's too much. But anyway, this is the common denominator, regardless of whether you are radical or not, whether you are for pro-environment or the pro-poor or whatever. This is a common denominator. Most of these guys claim that the original causes that gave birth to the new left are the same causes that gave birth to the original, the old left: poverty, injustice, social disparities, violence. This is how they convince the population to vote for them. They also express the desire to counter this Washington consensus. They all said we are dissatisfied with the neoliberal agenda. And we have the formula to deliver what this model has failed to. We can bring shared benefits, greater equity, participation, economic inclusion. Think about it. If you have your ID to vote, which many Latin American countries do, by the way, not here in the US, and that's another political issue, right? But in Mexico, for example, I cannot vote if I don't have my ID for voting. And many Latin American countries do that. Anyway, you're holding your card and you are looking at all the candidates, and you look at the right governments, signing NAFTA, pro-trade, privatizing, liberalizing, and you know that these things are not working for you. And then you're listening to these guys promising you that they are not just going to cancel what has been done, but they are going to implement a new set of policies that are finally going to include you. They are finally going to get you a decent job at a decent pay, and that violence is going to stop, that injustice is going to go away. What are you going to do? You vote for them. And they did. They did. Mm-hmm. So, obviously, the intellectual framework utilized by these guys is based in part on, guess what? Dependency theory, structuralism. So there seems to be a consensus among this group of politicians that addressing poverty, social injustice, and all of these things happening in Latin America require the intervention of the state. This is a responsibility of the government as well, not just market forces, right? So this is very important to understand, guys, because think about this. I normally explain this with this idea of a pendulum. I'm going to stop sharing here. I'm going to record the last 20 slides or so for Friday. So I'm going to stop sharing this. Somebody's calling me. To explain the following, think about what's happening or what has happened in Latin America as a pendulum. So first you have in the 1930s, the pendulum moving towards the right, free trade and all that. Then the Great Depression comes and everything moves back to the left, heavy government intervention, tariffs, regulation, and all that. Then you had a process of liberalization that basically concludes with the debt crisis of the 1982 in Mexico, right? And then the pendulum is shifting again towards the left. I'm sorry, towards the right. You know, liberalization, IMF, Washington Consensus. In the 1990s, it goes back away, it's going back again towards the left. Right now, depending on which country you're looking at, but I see Latin America moving towards the center again. You know, the pendulum goes left and right, but always passes through the center in the political spectrum, speaking parlance. So many countries right now are in the process of moving towards the center to become more appealing for electoral purposes. If they go too much to the extreme, too much to the right, or too much to the left, they lose. So they are moving towards the center. Anyway, let me make a stop here to hear some comments, if you have any, guys. Anybody? All right, that's fine. So, like I said, I am going to record the second half of this PowerPoint, which is going to be the class for Friday, and on Monday we're going to start a new section. But this particular section on the New Left is very important, guys, because remember, your research or your paper for this class is precisely this topic. I want you to write about the contributions, positive or negative or both, of the New Left to economic development in Latin America. So this particular presentation, the PowerPoint, is key for your papers. So I mean, I don't mean to dismiss the importance of any other material, but this one in particular seems like something that you need to be paying attention to. Okay. And again, as we keep moving on, I'll be happy to entertain questions about how to address the paper. Some of you in the past have chosen to write about a particular country. Some of you have chosen to write about a particular person, right? Some of you focus on a particular region. So I remember, for example, papers on Central America as a region. I remember papers on Hugo Chavez, the person. I remember papers on Brazil, the country, right? Or some of you write about the entire process. So it really is up to you. But I really want you to think about this, to process all this happening and write something about it, right? And again, there is no wrong or right. I am not going to take points even if I disagree with your point or your position. That's not the idea. What I want you to do is to train to think and write something about this important topic that is shaping up Latin America today. All right. Okay, I'm going to stop recording now.